As we get started, I want to give a special shout out to all our wonderful interns and volunteers. We've just got so many exceptional young leaders who are showing us the way to a better future. And I personally am thrilled to welcome all of you to this webinar because I know we have something special for you here today. Everyone here in this group knows that we come together at a difficult and critical moment. This is part of our webinar series. We are all part of one another. And that's a line from the great Barbara Deming. If you're not yet familiar with her work, I urge you to look her up. Her writing has been deeply meaningful to me personally. I found that line, we are all part of one another, to be reflective of an ancient truth that lies at the heart of all the world's religions and most deep spiritual practice. Some refer to this truth as oneness. Others note that we can't harm another being without harming ourselves. We have heard that we are tied together in a single garment of destiny. This line is particularly relevant for this conversation. We can't just put up walls between us and somehow believe it will make us safe, or those on the other side of the wall less human, less deserving of life and dignity. I'm thrilled to welcome you because I know we have something special for you today. My name is David Hart. I'm the co-director of Nonviolence International. If you haven't yet done so, please open your chat window and introduce yourself. I'm going to start with a brief introduction to the organization and why this topic matters so deeply to me. Mubarak, Jonathan, and Michael Beer, who you'll hear from later in our program, have been with Nonviolence International for 30 years. I am the new team member, having just arrived in the summer of 2018. I've been a peace activist my whole life and worked with many great nonprofits. And friends, honestly, I can say to you, Nonviolence International is not like other organizations. These are not normal times, and this is not a normal group. NVI has a rare and a precious mix of activist passion, intellectual depth, and personal warmth. Just what the world needs now. I hope on this webinar today, you will see clear evidence of each of those three key elements and what makes this organization unique. Today, we gather to begin a difficult and important conversation. Difficult because for many of us, giving up on the two-state solution means abandoning long-held beliefs. I am Jewish and was raised being told of a land taken during a war when the whole world was against us, and still somehow we prevailed. Yes, international law made clear that no nation can occupy land they took in war, but we were defending ourselves and we certainly would not hold the land long. My commitment to peace and justice comes directly from the values taught in my secular Jewish home. When I learned something of the reality of Palestinian life and came to see it as a deep affront to those basic values Jews are taught are at the heart of our faith, I was somehow more able to accept this contradiction because it came with a story that land would be traded for peace and the occupation would end soon. That was decades ago. Throughout all these years, I have advocated for a two-state solution, attempting to help people see the harsh reality of the occupation. Sadly, actions that have reshaped facts on the ground have made the call for a two-state solution more of a cover for oppressive policies than a realistic path towards peace with justice. For years, I have made my living as a conflict resolution practitioner, and I believe deeply in the power of those tools. Jonathan's book attempts a fundamental principle of creative, constructive conflict resolution. He takes seriously the basic needs of both parties. I'm sure some will challenge his approach, but I'm hopeful this book can really help change the conversation by offering something new and different to a situation that has become stuck. And friends, let's be honest with each other. It is stuck on a reality that serves neither side well. I hope most Jews will come to understand that the one-state solution is a key part of our long-delayed tikkun olam, our moral obligation to heal and repair the world. Wanting to meet people wherever they are and seeking to embrace radically honest conversations, even when it scares us, I must ask, what will it take to extend our compassion to the Palestinian people? Maybe we could start with the simple recognition that they are fully human. Radical, I know, but true nonetheless. We seem to be able to accept the suffering of others when we are able to dehumanize them, when we can see them not to be as loving, as fully alive as ourselves or our families. when we can turn away when we see them suffer needlessly. I know what we ask of all of you listening is not easy, but it is long past time we stopped avoiding our ongoing moral obligation to speak up about the suffering of the Palestinian people. My hope is that those willing to begin to grapple with this complex and difficult issue will read Jonathan's book and help us change the conversation. I urge you to bravely ponder what he says at this critical moment. Frankly, I'm struggling to remain hopeful in the face of so many terrible things happening in the world these days. These interrelated crises coming at us will not be easy to solve. But if we can expand our compassion to all those experiencing unnecessary suffering, we may yet find a path forward that embraces our deepest values. Our Palestinian brothers and sisters are calling out to be heard and need our support. Let us push past the boundaries of our comfort zones and carefully consider the proposal put forth by our brilliant, visionary co-founder of Nonviolence International. Friends, I want to challenge all of you and say that by being on this call, you are part of something bigger than yourself. In fact, you are in on the ground floor of an important new effort. Jonathan has called on us to help him change the conversation about Palestine-Israel. We recognize that as a stretch goal. It will only become possible if everyone here helps by seizing our own power and telling others about this important new text. None of us can solve the problems, the massive problems in the world today, in isolation. But together, if we each do our part, we might just find a way to make sure the current crisis opens a path forward. Nonviolence International advocates for active nonviolence and supports constructive, creative nonviolent campaigns worldwide. We are a backbone organization of the nonviolent movement, providing fiscal sponsorship to partners all over the globe. With an emphasis on Palestine, Israel, we tell the transformative stories of dynamic, emerging nonviolent movements that give us hope in difficult times and are reshaping what we view as possible. We've got a wonderful group introducing ourselves in the chat box. I just see Ethan from the Fellowship of Reconciliation, I've worked with many times over the years. So great to have all of you with us. Jonathan Kuttab is the co-founder of Nonviolence International. He's a well-known international human rights attorney. He's practiced law in the US, in Palestine, and Israel. And he is the only person I've ever heard of who practices law in 3 nations in 3 different languages. He was the head of the legal committee negotiating the Cairo Agreement of 1994 between Israel and PLO. Please see more of his bio in the chat. Jonathan, please kick us off.
I am so glad that we are starting this conversation. When I started this project, I really didn't think it was going to be as big or as important as it is. I think it started when me and Bob Herbst, whom you will hear from later today, started thinking about what does it take? What do we really want? What does each side really want? Can we create a new vision that makes sense for both people? And as David said, it was a painful conversation, because I am one of those who believed in a 2-state solution long before it became the accepted position of the Palestinians and many Israelis and of the international community. I thought it was a pragmatic way to deal with this conflict, with these 2 narratives, with these 2 ideologies that were mutually exclusive, just at loggerheads. The more we get, the less they get. The more they get, the less we get. 1 additional immigrant means 1 fewer person for us. 1 more Palestinian birth is a demographic threat to the other side. So it was important that we break through this paralysis, because after a while, it became clear to me that the 2-state solution not only doesn't work, because it has been thoroughly and systematically undermined, but that it has become an alibi for the status quo, an alibi for refusing to address the injustices involved, an alibi for failing to deal with sometimes the very racist and discriminatory nature of ideologies that totally negate and demonize and neglect each other. So this book actually has three parts. The first part really talks about how the two-state solution was created and how it was undermined and collapsed and is no longer workable. Because I think it's important to get rid of false hopes before we create new hopes. The second, which is basically the bulk of the most important part of the book, is to set out a vision. You know, it says, without a vision, the people perish. And people say, what is the vision? What do you want? What is it that you are aiming for? Is it even possible to think of a vision that satisfies the needs of both? And the answer is, I think it is possible, but it's very painful. It requires that we give up the idea of exclusivity. It means instead of fighting about whose narrative is correct and whose is not correct, saying, what is it that your narrative or your ideology provides for you? What is it that you want? You know, Zionist Israelis tell me we want a Jewish state. Well, what's a Jewish state? What does that mean? You can't circumcise a state. What is a Jewish state? So you ask, what is the irreducible minimum? What is it that you want out of this state? And you ask the Palestinians also, what is it that you want out of a Palestinian state? For a long time, we were told that the goal of Palestinian nationalism is statehood. And then that concept of statehood was so quickly deprived of all content, so that at the end, you can give me something, you can call it a state, but it means nothing. You give me a passport, but I can't travel. You give me a parliament, but I can't vote for it because you'll arrest anybody that you don't like if I vote for the wrong people. You give me an airport, but I can't fly out of it. So what is it that I want out of statehood? And I want something very concrete. I want freedom. I want equality. I want freedom of movement. I want self-fulfillment. I want participation in my life. I want empowerment. So a state maybe supposedly was supposed to give me that, but if you give me a state without any of this content, you give me nothing. So the second part of the book, as I said, is trying to, without being judgmental at all, and this is where I'm getting the worst criticism from everybody, because I don't critique Zionism. I don't talk about international law and human rights violations. I don't try to make judgments one way or the other. I certainly make it clear that there is no symmetry or equivalency between the two parties. I just say, here we are. Where do we go from here? Can we come up with a new vision that will accommodate the other rather than negate and demonize and criminalize and delegitimize the other? So that's, I think, the bulk of the book. And then the third part of the book, which I still think is the weakest, is a chapter that I was almost forced to add at the end, which is how do we get from here to there? That's actually a separate conversation, but people need to know. It's not enough to just give me this wonderful vision, which appears so utopian and so unrealistic. How do we move from here to there? How do we struggle towards that vision? How do we act in a way that promotes rather than makes further the realization of that vision? So this is how the conversation really started. And I am so pleased that so many people found it appropriate, timely, and necessary, and are willing to engage in it. I will say one thing, though. This book and this conversation is absolutely not for anybody who insists on their maximalist ideology. I'll start with myself. If I say Palestine Arabiya, Palestine is Arab, that all these Zionists who came from all over the world should go back to where they came from, because it's totally not right, because it's unjust, because this is my land, it's not theirs, then this book is not for me. I have nothing to say, I have nothing to share. Similarly, if you think that Israel should be as Jewish as France is French, God gave it to us, history gave it to us, the United Nations gave it to us, Balfour gave it to us, we want it, we are powerful, we need it, we are persecuted. For whatever reason, it should be ours, and we should be the dominant force here and nobody else. If you are not willing to accept the Palestinian rights here, then again, this book is not for you. You just pursue your own goal, and this conversation is not for you. This conversation is for those who say, despite what I believe, despite what I think, despite what I have grown up, despite my historic, religious, national, whatever rights, I recognize that there's this other group who are living in this land today, and I can't get rid of them. And it's not right to get rid of them. I need to find a way to accommodate them. I need to find a way to incorporate them into my vision. My Palestinianism must include the Israelis who are living here. And their Zionism needs to include the Palestinian people whose land they have come and taken. This is the essence of the book, and this is the essence of the conversation. And I think it's a worthwhile conversation to have. And I'm so glad that all of you are here to join in this conversation. And I'm totally open to those who disagree, to those who think it's unrealistic, to those who want to tweak it differently, to those who present serious challenges to it. And I'm open to the conversation, and I welcome all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's just awesome as usual, really moving to hear from you. And as we get into the respondents, one of the last points Jonathan made there is really important to us, that we agree on a lot of things, those of us on this call, and we know we learn from our disagreements. So we won't shy away from those disagreements where they emerge, but show how peace people deal with them, with love and respect and an open conversation. So our first respondent is Rabbi Lynn Gottlieb. I just met Lynn through my work with NVI, but I've admired her and her tireless commitment to faith-based activism for decades. She was one of the first women to become a rabbi in Jewish history. She is a visionary Jewish educator, a feminist, community organizer, peace activist, writer, klezmer dancer, percussionist, visual and ceremonial artist, and master storyteller. She writes on the cover of Jonathan's book, Some Are Trapped by the Past. This book opens the gate to the future. Please see more of her bio in the chat. Rabbi Lynn.
Marhaba, good morning. Greetings of peace and consolation to everyone. It's wonderful to be here. I see many people on the call, some of whom I've journeyed to Palestine with. I know many of us, we have this interlocking shared history of concern for seeking justice. And I'm glad to continue this amazing conversation. I want to begin by offering condolences to the Kuttab family. And I also want to begin by doing a land acknowledgement, and because changing what Jonathan is asking for is changing attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. And that is the process that we use confronting domestic violence. That is a process we're going to have to use confronting colonial settlerism. That is a process that we have to use when looking at systemic violence, to go to understand a root cause, and a repair for that means doing a land acknowledgement. And so on Turtle Island, I acknowledge that I am a guest on Ohlone land. And when I travel to Palestine, I acknowledge that I am a guest on Palestinian lands. And I visit my many relatives, Jewish relatives that I have there, and I also send greetings. I would like to offer, for me, which is a healing framework, because we're asked to move forward in a healing way, but one that also has accountability. And and I'm speaking now as a person who holds privilege in this conversation, because I can get on a plane and travel to Israel and become an instant citizen. Whereas generations and generations of Palestinians who have, who are really protectors of the land in some ways, the way we understand indigenous people here, protecting water, protecting ancient springs, protecting histories, protecting stories, continuity of family. This brings me to a sense that I have to engage this conversation in accountability, and therefore I come to tshuva and sulcha as a bridge for us to begin to change our attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors, so that we can begin a process of repaying what we owe, and through that process, a reparationist process, we can begin to heal our relationships and reestablish them on the basis of radical inclusion and equity and freedom of movement. This sense of we actually have the vision where we know where we're going, and we can begin to do this by repairing our relationships on the grounds of equity. So I hope that everyone reads the book and sees a very concrete method forward, and that those of us who are engaging in it do so from, especially those of us who are privileged in this conversation, do so from a point of view of accountability. Thank you.
You. Next up, we're going to hear from Robert Herbst. He's a human rights lawyer in New York City, a member of Westchester, New York chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace, an organization with a special place in my heart. He has been speaking and writing on Israel-Palestine since 2014. Please see more of his bio in the chat. Bob.
Thank you very much, David. And I want to echo the condolences that have already been expressed to Jonathan and his family. Very, very difficult time, which I know we all appreciate. I am humbled really to be on this panel, and just to tell you a little bit about how I met Jonathan, the influence he's had on me. I'm in my 70s, and for decades I was uncomfortable about what I saw happening both in Israel, Palestine, and the United States, but about the oppression over there. I only really expressed my concerns within the tribe until 2014, when the Gaza operation, Protective Edge, just became too much for me to bear. And at that time, having joined JVP, excuse me, and started to attend synods of Protestant churches debating BDS resolutions. I met in 2016, I think, Jonathan, who was in attendance at one of those. And we started talking, and we bonded very quickly over the one state idea, and we became good friends and colleagues. But it was much more of a one-way street, because Jonathan was way ahead of me in his thinking about what one had to do and what the kind of vision that he expresses and articulates in his book would look like. And, you know, we're two human rights lawyers coming to this issue from each of the two groups, one the oppressor, one the oppressed. And it's an existential issue for both peoples to liberate themselves from the soul-destroying roles of oppressor and oppressed. And that is true whether we come at this issue from a religious or secular, moral perspective, because there are really only two solutions. Once we accept the reality on the ground, which has been true for a long time now, that the two-state solution is no longer viable, there are really only two remaining solutions. We can continue a caste-based society in which one religious, tribal, or national group dominates the other, or we can work towards and figure out how to bring about a truly shared society where rights and resources are shared, where all can live out the meaning of their creed, religion, and the democratic principles that that many of us have been taught, and we see losing out in many places around the world, including our own experience here in the last 4 years, which have been an unremitting disaster for the Palestinians. And as a Jew approaching the issues of Palestinian rights, my fundamental perception is that a caste-based society where whites dominate people of color, as here, where Jews subjugate and rule over Palestinian Muslims and Christians, it is not Jewish. It's not a Jewish enterprise, a settler colonial project. It's not Jewish to run one. It's not kosher, it's treif. No Jew should be a part of it when there's an opportunity to struggle for a shared land of freedom between the river and the sea. So the perceptions that underline Jonathan's book and the challenges that its principles and insights pose are critical to both peoples. And one of the basic principles that he enunciates in the book, and that you just heard him express, is that can Israelis and Palestinians sufficiently empathize with each other to make equal rights and equal resources and the opportunity to live lives of human dignity work? Can we accommodate the basic needs of the other in the context of equal democratic rights? That is a very difficult struggle, considering the trauma of both peoples. And you know, the question, once we read the book, and if we adopt or understand the principles, then the question arises, what do we do with them and these perceptions that underlie the one state idea, and how do we mobilize around them? And several fundamental issues present themselves. One is, can Palestinians,
please wrap in about a minute.
Yeah, who of course must lead this struggle, it's their struggle primarily, can they give up their aspirations for a separate state? Can they accept the reality that, and form a consensus around the one state idea, and can they mobilize themselves around it? And that is a question, question number one. And then the second question is, how can we as allies help facilitate that mobilization? And we need to do a lot of work here among the Jewish and Christian communities that fund and support and facilitate the really the apartheid project that we all have to confront over there. So I'll leave it there and turn it back to you, David.
Thank you so much. Finally, we're going to hear from a new friend who I strongly urge all of you to Google. In the very busy days preparing for this webinar, I have taken great joy getting to know her via email and through her online presence. Azmera Hammouri-Davis is a Black Palestinian professional poet, speaker, prayer warrior, educator, and producer from Hawaii. with a Master's of Theological Studies from Harvard University. In 2019, Harvard's Religion and Public Life program sponsored her to promote cultural identity and English literacy in Ramallah, where she connected with her Hammouri family. She's currently the lead facilitator for a growing network of Black Christians for Palestine through Friends of Sabeel North America. Friends, if you take the time to check her out online, you're going to find a deep commitment to both justice and joy. Her work challenges us to see the beauty in each other, even as we work to change the harsh reality of the world today. Azmera.
Wow, thank you so much for that introduction, David. Greetings, peace, Warigani. I'm so honored to be here with you all today, and I'm just soaking in all of the knowledge and wisdom that Rabbi Gottlieb shared, that Robert, you've shared. And so I will keep my time brief. I will start by sharing a brief excerpt that I wrote to submit my letter of intent to study in Ramallah last summer for 2 months. My earliest memory growing up in the Middle East, I'll start, here it is, okay. Growing up in Hawaii, despite the fact that one of my last names was Palestinian, I never learned about or connected with my heritage that much. Mom's father, Grandpa Marwan, was someone I only learned about in her rap lyrics and songs. His early death when she was 14 years old exacerbated this cultural chasm, leaving many pieces of the Palestine puzzle to be woven together. Eventually, remnants of his culture would etch their rightful place into my halcyon memories, but never without the painful awareness of how clueless I was about the context. Like many, Arab stigma post 9/11 dissuaded me from learning about the political realities in the region. When the opportunity to learn about Palestine in context while at Harvard arrived, that all changed. I knew this would be the only possible chance to learn about this side of my family without hindrance of particular Western bias. Initially, I was selected to participate in this alternative winter break course. It was called Narratives of Displacement and Belonging in Israel and the West Bank as part of my Master's of Theological Studies program. After being in Palestine for 3 weeks, it became clear that I needed to not only learn more about my maternal side of the family, but also interrogate my own cultural and religious assumptions. So last summer, Harvard's Religion, Conflict, and Peace Initiative, now the Religion and Public Life program, sent me to Ramallah Friends School to teach English literacy and promote cultural identity through the Afro-Brazilian martial art of capoeira to K-12 students in the I Know I Can summer program. While there, I engaged and met some incredibly resilient, beautiful, peace, warm, loving people. Both I got to meet Israelis within the 48 borders, and I got to meet folks within the West Bank. I listened to narratives of displacement, of belonging, of longing, of deep hurt and deep joy, of a generational trauma that I'd been all too familiar with, but hadn't yet had language to articulate within this context. In many ways, it was the exact antithesis of what US news portrayed about the Arab throat in the States. I met Palestinian Christians and Muslims and even learned about Palestinian Jews who from the same town that my family is from, El Khalil, today known as Hebron. And all I had heard growing up was public narratives that kind of perpetuated a skepticism about how Arabs, especially Palestinians, are perpetual foreigners. I remember hearing from Dr. Hanan Ashwari talk about coming and studying in the States and combating this perception that you must be a perpetual foreigner or a terrorist. Whether it was slurs like desert nigger or watching certain stereotypes in Aladdin that promoted sort of self-hatred, these were all subliminal messages that were being portrayed in ways that discouraged me from wanting to learn about this particular side of my family. In high school, my favorite teacher was a white Ashkenazi Jewish male, Mr. Brace, may he rest in peace. He taught AP English, and I loved the structure, autonomy, and ethic of humor he espoused in his class. He always pushed us to apply ourselves more and not settle for anything less. So much so that I became his teaching assistant my senior year. I remember when I had him sign my yearbook, he jokingly wrote, "I'm so glad I'll no longer have to live in the fear every day that you'll bomb the buildings." His facetious personality was enough for me to scoff that off. I had no idea exactly what he was talking about, but I knew that he was always a little rough around the edges, and that's what people loved about him. Why would he say that? It caught me a little off guard, and I laughed it off. And this was one of the first times I realized that having Palestinian heritage in the in America at times wasn't safe. Given that I had no context at the time, I minimized my discomfort and chalked it up to his facetious personality. When Mom got mad, I told her she was overreacting. He didn't mean any harm by it. I contested her on his behalf, so quick to protect his intentions and overlook my own feelings. It wasn't until coming to grad school that I realized how much I've sort of internalized that joke. Will other people automatically assume I'm some terrorist or that I'm colluding with some ominous radical group if I speak up on Palestine? Or worse, and the usual, often recycled gaslighting tactic, will they deem me anti-Semitic? We know that hatred and bigotry in any way, shape, and form, as Dr. Martin Luther King reminds us, the three evils of war, racism, and economic exploitation are ones that are intimately interconnected and interrelated. And that if we are to pursue justice and truth and liberation, then we must see our collective liberation as tied to each other. It didn't dawn on me until I was being arrested at the airport 7 years later while leaving Israel how gravely insensitive my teacher's joke really was. I was contained for an hour. Most Palestinians are held for even longer. Strip searched, patted down, interrogated prior to boarding my flight. My crime? Having a Palestinian grandfather. Sadly, I never even had the chance to meet him, and even if I did, what gave them the right to infringe upon my basic human rights? The very human rights that were implemented post-Holocaust, may their souls rest in peace, to ensure that such injustices do not repeat themselves. To ensure that such injustices do not repeat themselves. Not unlike most Palestinians, I was classified as a security threat to justify this discrimination. While being contained inside of the airport is different than being targeted by police on the streets, I couldn't help but to think about how similar this mistreatment was to that of Black people who are stopped and frisked in the States. Different contexts, different realities, similar forms of presumptions, attitudes, and injustice. I was traveling with 3 other Harvard colleagues. One was a white American Jewish woman, another Black Ghanaian woman, and a Latinx male. Of our group, I was the only one stopped, frisked, and arrested. When I asked the airport officer why I was being arrested, I received a glaring stare followed by the statement, "This is Israel, what do you think?" Excuse me for even asking, I thought to myself. I was made to feel delusional for expecting anything differently. How naive of me. My Jewish colleague witnessed the entire escapade, and I can sense she was also anxious about the blasphemous circumstances, but must not have had the language for naming any of her discomfort. So outside of the usual pleasantries and remedial, "Are you okay?" immediately after, there wasn't much else I could see that she knew what to do. Our capacity for holding tension and holding these critical conversations around cultural competency are limited, and we don't have as many tools as we would hope within the public sphere to talk about these very real lived realities. Rather than follow up afterwards to see to it that this be addressed, we both chose to remain silent. I know so many who do, and can I honestly say I'm surprised. Those who benefit from certain forms of hegemony, those who have privilege. I myself, as an American with a passport, I have a certain privilege. And there's not always incentive to speak out against these injustices, despite our best attempts. If we had to rely upon people in power to speak out against injustice, would any people of color be here today? I know I definitely wouldn't. Martin Luther King reminds us that progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. Coretta jumps in and says, freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it every generation. Oppressors don't want the oppressed to speak up, and so we do, because that would shatter their comfortability. Despite a history of the US and Black solidarity with Palestine, so many freedom fighters like Angela Davis, Malcolm X, Stokely Carmichael, Ethel Minor, Howard Thurman inform us of the need for moral consistency and solidarity with Palestine. Rabbi Heschel, yet the large majority of Americans remain in the dark about this topic altogether. I remember sitting inside Miss Silva's 8th grade class at Kehl Middle School on the Big Island of Hawaii when I read Anne Frank's diary. I was heartbroken to hear of such harms done to her and her family, and amazed by the way she captured her reality so poignantly through journaling. In many ways, Anne Frank's diary inspired me to document my own journey and helped me realize the power that writing can have in asserting one's dignity. Yet I was never taught about the catastrophe that followed for Palestinians 3 years after the Holocaust ended. These direct cultural and structural violences that often are implemented by US sanctions can safeguard white supremacist ideologies that dishonor the dignity of Black, Jewish, and Palestinian life by failing to teach this history altogether. Consider, for example, the revisionist ways we've seen certain administrations recently administer the proclamation on Columbus Day. the 4th of July were a time for truth, one that revealed the historical amnesia that erodes the moral fabric of our nation, what might we be able to deem possible for envisioning a future where citizenship, where equity, equal rights, and justice is afforded to all and not just some? This is the hope that Jonathan Kuttab's book offers me as I think about what it might look like to envision a future beyond the two-state solution. I've met so many colleagues from the Jewish community here and overseas who are committed to this work, who are organizing, whether it's with BDS or JVP or HDS Students for Palestine. And it's become so clear that beyond tribalisms, beyond reductivist logic or reducing and gaslighting one another, there is a wave of people ready to dismantle old logics, to cultivate and to see the joy and humanity in each of us, and to say that this can be different. And if we try, we just may be able to create a future where all of us are proud, dignified, and humanized in the pursuit for liberation. So we see these prejudices flow and roll out day by day, but we also see spaces for hope and possibility. And being here today, having the opportunity to share a little bit of my journey is one way that I receive hope. I'm so grateful for Jonathan and his work. And I want to leave us with words by Jean Zaru, who I had the privilege to spend some time with both when I was in Palestine, and whose words held me after returning the first time and not really being sure where to put all of those experiences. She says, people ask me time and again over the years, what keeps you so hopeful? In spite of such a bleak political situation and circumstance, what keeps you so hopeful? And she says, my goal is simple. My goal is simply to create a crack, because where there is a crack, a little bit of light can come in, and a little bit of light can drive out a lot of darkness. And so I leave you all with this, that my goal here today, that the goal that I believe Jonathan is committed to, along with all of my other colleagues and comrades and elders who are on this call, is to continue to wedge a crack, to drive a crack, so that we may allow more light to shine in. And that as that light shines in, darkness will have to fall. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. It was really impressive to hear what each of you shared. One of my favorite parts of being an organizer is dreaming up things in active collaboration with respected colleagues and then seeing them take shape. Again, friends, you're in at the ground floor of something here. What we build together is the question before us. So we know we gather to explore a vision for a better world. Our beautiful world is broken, and still we recognize that our broken world is full of beauty. Personally, I celebrate the diverse, global, youth-led, nonviolent movement taking shape all around the world, a movement of movements with the power to save us. And as we transition into a Q&A period where we hope to hear from many of you, I turned first to two exceptional young leaders to ask the first questions. I met Meg Wilder recently on an NVI call. We only heard from her briefly, but I was impressed and asked that she share her story with all of you and ask the first question. We're going to hope to hear most of your voices. We can take questions in chat, but we want most of the questions, if we can, to hear your voices. So we first turn to Meg and ask the panel to be brief in your responses so we can get lots of questions in. Meg.
Thank you so much, David. Hi, everybody. My name is Meg Wilder. I'm a student activist at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. Thank you so much to our speakers, to our author, Jonathan Kuttab, and to Nonviolence International for hosting this event. Nonviolence International has had a big impact on me personally in my journey as a student activist. In high school, I had the opportunity to interview NVI's founder, Mubarak Awad, for a project I was working on. I was able to come to their office in DC and interview him and speak with him, and he really inspired me to continue advocating for Palestinian rights in college. He even gifted me a small flag featuring an image of the earth and the words, "We're all in this together," which I still have on my desk. And I think it's very fitting considering the theme of this webinar series being, we are all part of one another, which is very true. Since then, I've been active in my campus's chapter at William & Mary with my campus's chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine. I've also recently begun working with the Faith Forum on Middle East Policy, which is a network of Christian denominations working together to advocate for a just peace in Israel-Palestine. So thank you to Nonviolence International for starting me on that journey. My question is for Jonathan, but I invite all of the speakers to weigh in. Jonathan, in your book, you argue that due to realities on the ground, a two-state solution is no longer viable. However, as we all know, the narrative of a two-state solution continues to dominate discussions of Israel-Palestine. It can be difficult to open this conversation up when some might be categorically opposed to a one-state solution from the start. So my question is, in your opinion, how can a one-state solution come to be accepted into mainstream society and mainstream dialogues? Is the change at an individual level in terms of people's mindsets, or do you think it's a more macro level change in politics and governance that needs to happen as well? Thank you so much.
Very, very good question. Actually, there are a number of reasons why the one-state conversation is difficult to have, and why the two-state paradigm and language continues to dominate the conversation, even though everybody knows it's not gonna happen. One reason, I think, is because people are so afraid of the alternative. And the alternative is really one state. And one state really requires a major rethinking of so many painful issues that people just like, let's not talk about it. Let's talk about two states. We know it's not going to happen, but at least it's a comfortable place to be. This is what everybody talks about, and so we'll talk about it even though we know it's not happening. So it's easier not to talk about a one-state solution and to concentrate on only two-state solution. So that's one reason. The other reason, of course, is power and privilege. Those who have power and those who have privilege don't like to talk about taking away that power. In fact, they feel persecuted, oppressed. If I'm a slave owner and somebody comes and talks about getting rid of slavery, they're taking away my power, they're taking away my property. So I don't want to talk about a non-slave society. I'll talk about improving the situation of slaves and giving them better food and et cetera, and making sure the families aren't broken up. But to talk about removing slavery is a radical thing that most people aren't willing to engage in. So I think this is the truth, but it becomes important for us to really get rid of the false promise of peace in order to arrive at real peace. You know, when you subvert the concept of peace, when you think peace means you just have a nice arms deal and with different countries that are not at war at all, and that you create normalization and you avoid the centrality of the Palestinian problem, and say, I created peace. Why shouldn't you be in favor of peace? I mean, I'm a person who loves peace, but these peace deals that Trump has come up with at the last end, I have to oppose because they have nothing to do with real, genuine peace. So if you really want to talk about genuine peace, you must be willing to say what false peace is, and you must be willing to give up false peace in order to go for genuine, just peace.
Awesome. Thank you, Meg and Jonathan. Next, we're going to turn to Woojin Shin. He's an intern with NVI currently.
I'd just like to,
I'm sorry.
I would just like to visualize what Jonathan said.
There you go.
We have to really put a crack in by changing the method, the symbols that we generally use. So this year, Hanukkah went from being a military victory to thinking about what it means to be brave in the face of danger, to dare to seek another vision, and to put spirituality and the equity of all people as a way to conclude, to create radical inclusion and equity. So we have to change the way we look at things. This is my BDS dreidel.
Love it. Thank you. Woojin is an intern with NVI currently, and he just told us he'd like to volunteer with us full-time this coming semester. He is a brilliant young leader, someone I've come to count on for so many core tasks in his short time with NVI. He set up this webinar in Zoom and all the related pages on our website. Friends, NVI has 3 interns this semester, and I'm pleased to report that all 3 have asked to stay on with us after their term ends. It says something about what they found here, and it's a major shot in the arm for me personally. Woojin, your question.
Thanks for the intro, and thank you for all the panelists for sharing their thoughts. As David said, I'm finishing this fall as an intern and coming back. And during my time working and being part of this team, I learned how supportive NVI's surrounding community truly is. For all of you to show up, learn, and try and help promote Jonathan's book not only means a lot to him, but to us at NVI as well. It means we're doing something right. And it makes us want to continue to push because people want to be involved. And that was one of the main reasons I wanted to stay. I wanted to help grow the community and reach new people because I believe NVI has an important message to promote. And so my question is, how can the younger generations be involved in this conversation, and how do you want them to use the booklet?
Okay, this is a very important question because in this country, which is very pivotal, by the way, to what's happening in the Middle East, young people are much more attuned to justice, to participation in making the world a better place, to being involved, refusing to allow things to happen in their name that they don't like. I am very thrilled, particularly within the American Jewish community, to see young people really dedicated to ideas of justice because of their Jewish tradition. As Jews, they don't like what they see happening in Israel, Palestine. So I think we are facing a situation where the state of Israel today, under its current government, is more interested in power, is more interested in the 1% than in the masses. They are very pleased to deal with the Arab leaders, not with their population. There was a very big study that was done by the Center for the Washington, the Arab Center in Washington, a poll by all the different countries. What did they think of normalization? And in each and every country, anywhere from 99% to at the least 75 or 78% were totally opposed to having their countries normalize relations with Israel until it deals with the Palestinian question. So the question is, young people can in fact make a change. Those who are at the top, the 1%, the top leadership of the Congress and the Senate and the administration may not be very sympathetic, but young people will demand justice and will demand action. And therefore, I'm very pleased whenever I see young people being very active and very involved.
Can I just add?
Yes, we're going to hear from all of you. Azmera as well on this one, but Bob.
Well, I think progress depends on the young people because our generation hasn't done anywhere near a good enough job in the struggle, and the struggle is all interconnected. We're talking about caste, privilege, the exercise of power in many different interconnected realms. It is certainly true in the United States. We have a caste-based society ever since 1619, when slavery began in this country, and the structure of caste and privilege remains, and it's not at all consistent with our American democratic principles. And young people sense that and are the most important actors that can be. So they have to get involved in politics. They have to speak truth to power and keep doing it. That's a brief answer.
Thank you. Azmera, do you have something you care to share on this one?
Yeah, I think I'm always energized by this question of what can young people be doing, because if we look at history, it's always been the younger people who have catalyzed and mobilized that movement, right? In the civil rights, folks, their parents had to be working, and so it was 13, 14-year-olds who were getting, you know, imprisoned and jailed because they're out on the streets. And so I think that for me, I'm thinking a lot about, of course, what the movement for Black Lives is doing, and there's a reason why on their calling card, one of the calling cards are, you know, justice for Palestine, raising at the very least awareness. The Sunrise Movement is also doing a lot of really beautiful multi-generational, multiracial work. And I think kind of coalition building on what NVI is already doing and what so many other movements are doing, invokes a lot of hope in me for folks that are operating at this nexus of doing this dance between academia, academic institutions, grassroots organizing, and sort of finding our way in between. I think continuing to find the advocates within these spaces and institutions that believe in institution building for more forward-facing, grassroots, movement-oriented work that's non-linear, but also horizontal. I'm thinking a lot of Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and for me, I always go back to you know what his work invokes in thinking with, for, and alongside, as opposed to thinking that a problem is going to come, a solution is going to come from the outside, it'll come from the inside. So touching directly with people who are doing that work daily and who are just living and surviving daily, and then leveraging what little access or privilege we do have to be able to spark more conversations, I think is a fruitful way forward. Thank you for your question, Woojin.
Awesome. So I'd love to hear people's voices as you ask your questions. I see there have been some in the chat. Graham, Michael will speak to the publication when he speaks shortly. Gerald had a hand up, but is no longer seeing the hand up. So Barbara, I can read a question from chat, but if you're with us and in a situation where you can unmute and speak directly to the team, we'd welcome that as well. Barbara Taft, unmuted, yes.
Yes.
I just want to, before we move on, I want to stress an intergenerational approach as well. Because sometimes people, you know, kind of, we constantly make these binaries, and they're having been to Standing Rock, for instance, and also, you know, spent some time in Palestinian culture. There is this wealth of richness in historical memory in the past. And I'm thinking right now of LaDonna Brave Bull Allard, who started the Standing Rock movement, for instance, and how people responded. So I would like us to move forward, movement building, you know, quilting and movement building as much as we possibly can to move the idea that a future is possible, not just because of a dream, but because we are working hard on the ground to make this possible in 10,000 different ways.
Lovely. So we'll turn to Barbara, and then I see Gerald has his hand up, and Andrew, I see a question in the chat. If you're able to speak, that would be great. But first, Barbara Taft, please.
Hi. I actually have two questions, and they're related to the length of time that it would take to reach this lofty goal, because getting people to respect each other and to empathize with one another doesn't happen overnight. So is there a timeline? And the second one is, how do we bring in extremists? Because there are extremists on both sides, and they're not likely to want to convert to this way of thinking. Thank
And
you.
if panelists can be brief, so we'll get in a few more before we wrap.
Okay, time. I don't know about time. I can only tell you that events in Israel-Palestine are telescoped. You have things that take centuries in other parts of the world over history. We have had in 1 century, Zionism and the State of Israel rose out of nothing to a mini superpower and has begun its decline very rapidly, all within less than 1 century. So events are telescoped in the Middle East, so we can be at least have that to think about. The second part of your question was
Extremists.
extremists. Well, there will always be extremists, and I started by saying that those who do not accept that the other side has anything at all positive, you know, what can we do? We have to deal with them, and their societies particularly have to deal with them. But you would be surprised. You would be surprised how many people would be willing to go along with something that addresses the fundamental basic issues of interest to each side. When these issues are not addressed, that's when the extremists find a lot of support. We saw that at the beginning of the Oslo process. Oslo was a huge compromise for the Palestinians. It was giving up 78% of Palestine. It was giving up on a whole lot of things. And yet there was so much excitement and so much interest and so much hopefulness that the extremists just piped it down for a while. And we were very quiet for a while until things became clear that this wasn't really going anywhere and that this was not really addressing the needs of people. So I am hopeful. I think that we can handle the extremists. Each society can handle the extremists among its groups.
I'd like to offer 2 examples in terms of the time issue. When I started college in 1965, the Vietnam War was moving into full steam. There was virtually no anti-war movement on campuses or in the United States. In 3 years, in March of 1968, that movement had grown to the point where we deposed the President of the United States. President Johnson, in March of '68, announced he wasn't going to run for president. Ending the war took a number more years, but there was, in a very quick amount of time, there was progress. On the other hand, in South Africa, it took decades before a sufficient amount of pressure, of BDS, of boycott, the sanctions, made it, actually disincentivized the Afrikaners in control of the society and the government in South Africa to continue apartheid. And that struggle goes on today, because even though the government changed and apartheid was removed, there's still an equality struggle going on. So it's really hard to say, but the struggle must go on, because we can't live with the immorality and oppression that we have here.
Gerald, we will come to you next. there's an interesting conversation in the chat. I'll just, for those who don't know, Holy Land Trust and the Center for Jewish Nonviolence, who's supporting the South Hebron Hills things that Rabbi Lynn has mentioned, are fiscally sponsored projects of NVI. If you haven't been to our website, please do go there, nonviolenceinternational.net, and check out our list of partners. Michael may speak more to that, but Gerald, we'd like to hear from your brief.
Yeah, thank you. First, I want to express my condolences to my brother Jonathan and his family. We go back for at least 40 years of working together, and my brother Mubarak, with whom I've fasted outside of the State Department, my sister Lynn, who was together with a few of our friends on the Upper West Side of New York, co-founder of the first Jewish American organization to call for mutual recognition between two peoples, Brera. I urge everybody to read carefully Jonathan's book. It's a masterpiece, and it has some tactical advice and answers to Meg's questions that were raised early, and it's not conventional wisdom. I want to read one sentence at the end that I think says something that, and I address this to everybody on this call who thinks they're going to work on behalf of what I would call a one-state vision rather than a one-state solution. The problem with the two-state solution, in my mind, was the solution part, not the two states. It was a pragmatic effort, and it's no longer pragmatic. That's one point. It had no justice to it. It was a 78-22. The compromise that was required of the Palestinians was not a just ask, but it was at least a pragmatic effort at moving towards peace. It's no longer pragmatic. Jonathan writes, I dare to imagine that it can lead to a richer, more vibrant Palestinian nationalism, talking about his vision, and to a more humane, moral, and richer Zionist movement. That sentence is critical in terms of the way you view this conflict. It's a mutual recognition of the rights of two peoples. It has to be based on justice and human dignity for both peoples. It's very subtle. He also addresses the question of those of us who are in the diaspora, whether Palestinian or Jews, in terms of working together. It's a very critical effort. Mubarak knows of Eddie Kaufman's effort to set up cousins clubs in Latin America. It's critical that we not add fuel to the fire that's already there by not working together and not understanding.
I gotta ask you to wrap your question.
The specific oppressions. So my point is simply that you can't work on this issue without recognizing without acknowledging mutual recognition of two peoples and basing yourself on justice and human dignity. I urge that we don't talk about one state solution. We talk about one state vision, or because I think that's the brilliance of what Jonathan writes about there. It's not a solution. It's an attempt to bring justice and dignity into a situation which has those elements are not at the forefront. So that's how I would urge that kind of language to everybody who's participating.
So maybe we'll turn to you, Jonathan, and to each of the panelists. Then we've got the most important part of the program yet to come. So we're going to have to make those last ones. So Jonathan, and then each of our panelists on this or what your closing remarks. Jonathan gets another closing after the most important part.
I thank you very much for the corrective because I really think that it is important to note that I am not presenting the Holy Grail of solutions. I am inviting people to a conversation which other people have been involved with. I mean, there are people who are working. There's the One Democratic State movement. There are other people who are talking about one state scenarios. What I am trying to do is invite people into a conversation where they can break out of the current paralysis and start thinking in terms that involve the other, that involves the vision. You don't have to accept the ideology of the other. You don't have to get into the fight between the two narratives. You must begin to say, look, this is the reality. I don't care what you may think as a Palestinian nationalist. There's 7 million Jews living in Palestine today, and they're going nowhere. And you have to come to terms with that reality, and you find a way to live with them. If you're a Zionist, I don't care what you think about Torah and the Bible and the history and you must realize that there's another 6 or 7 million non-Jews living under your state control, and they're going nowhere. And you must find a way to deal with them. This is basically the thrust of what I am saying, and I'm inviting people to say, how can we do that? And can we do that in a way that has integrity, and that has justice in it, and that has humanity in it, and that does not erase or negate the other? This is basically what I wanted to say. So thank you for that correction, Gerald.
Thank you so much. So we'll come to each of the panelists in the order they spoke for your closing 30 seconds or a minute. We're going to have the most important part about what we're going to build, and then we'll come back to Jonathan for some closing thoughts. Rabbi Lynn, anything you want to add at this point?
Thank you very much. This is really to the white people on the call. That would be Ashkenazi Jewish people, Christian white people. I think we should be thinking about how white supremacy works in this context, and look at the way that Israel as a state is functioning in that context right now. And if we don't, if we see ourselves as the good people, and we don't take in really the issues of critical race theory and center Palestinian voices and try to really adapt our tactics in the way we're learning to do with Black Lives Matter, we're not going to move this conversation forward. We need to enter a process of accountability that is part of the tshuva context, that's part of a reparationist context where we establish systems of accountability. And we can do that on a grassroots level and begin to build those relationships with organizations on the ground and here from that perspective, just as we are doing here, we're trying to do here in response to 400 years of white supremacy on Turtle Island. So that would be my advice in this moment as we lift up Jonathan's vision, and that is a vision forward. Reparationist understanding is a healing vision because it's one of accountability.
Thank you. Closing thought from you, Bob?
Yeah, I want to take my closing minute to say that I agree with Gerald and Jonathan that the conversation has to come first, but I don't agree that we should not, as quickly as possible, pay attention to the practical issues that the vision raises, including what kind of structures could be in place. How do you dress this vision in a politics and a government that would assure two peoples their guaranteed rights in perpetuity, for example. And one of the great things about Jonathan's book is he begins to explore those issues in the book. And the advantage of doing that is that it advances the conversation, because very often you present an amorphous one state idea and people say, oh no, that could never work. What are the examples? How could you possibly put that together? So I think the two go hand in hand in actually moving the conversation forward. And I hope we can make progress with both of those. And I thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this tremendous discussion.
Thank you. Azmera?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll speak and taking sort of a page from Rabbi Gottlieb's book in speaking directly to the communities that we are a part of and where our sphere of influence is. So as a Black Christian who is committed, who's also a Palestinian, who's committed to this work, I think my work begins with talking to my peers and folks that are in my community and gaining knowledge and insight. And what are the knowledge gaps? Where are the ignorance gaps that we all have? And how can we lovingly call each other in instead of call each other out? Because we know that a future that is built on just peace building, that's rooted in what Miriam Kaba talks about in transformative and healing justice, is, as was mentioned, a future that lays the bedrock for accountability, for compassion, for empathy, for understanding. And that all starts with being able to sit with ourselves, our tears, the areas where we fall short, the areas that we are brilliant at, and being able to celebrate those. So I think beginning first on the interpersonal, to then allow that to flow out into the extra and the external. The external, I'm in the hip hop tradition, we say extra personal, is where for me that work begins. And I'm just so grateful to see and to know that this community exists and that we can do it in our own microcultures, create our microcultures to create a larger macro culture that's rooted in love and justice. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Look forward to working with you. So the most important part of this call is beginning now. Jonathan has called on us to help change the conversation. We know that's about much more than posting his book on our website. Instead, it's what will happen if we all take active leadership. If I tell 2 friends and you tell 20 friends, imagine how the impact can multiply. If our good friend Kit Kittredge is with us, tell us a bit about the Freedom Flotilla Coalition, the U.S. boats to Gaza, and what you've been doing to promote Jonathan's book.
Hi, thank you so much. And I'm totally excited, hopeful, and energized by this project. And thank you everybody who's been putting so much energy into it. Excuse me. Since our last webinar, I've been reaching out to groups that I've been involved with in the Northwest and around the country and the world. U.S. Boats to Gaza would like to endorse and support this project. Freedom Flotilla Coalition has been, we've been discussing and are excited about it. And all of the Northwest groups that I work with, Seattle Mideast Awareness Campaign, Rachel Corrie Foundation, Veterans for Peace organizations, Students in Justice for Palestine, excuse me, with the University of Washington and up in Bellingham, and doing that kind of outreach with groups that I am in touch with, not only in the Northwest, but around the country. And I would just encourage everybody to do that, as has already been mentioned. And also, as we move forward, I believe there'll be donations needed to get this printing of this wonderful publication going. I would like to encourage people to donate. I plan to, and I'm just very excited about it. So thank you so much for this time and the effort and energy. And I look forward to this moving forward. I love the progressiveness of it and the way it feels like a real answer to people engaging in a positive, loving, kind, fruitful future. Thank you.
Thank you, Kit. Thank you, Kit. Next, we'll hear from Michael Beer, NVI's longtime director. Many of you know he's the driving force behind so much of what NVI is today. Michael, will you please tell us about some of the efforts already underway to promote Jonathan's book, and let us know how we can help? Hopefully there are a lot of inspired people on this call.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. It just warms my heart. We have a tremendous group of people here, almost 100 people, who really care about the conflict over in Palestine and Israel, but also care about the terrible challenges in the United States, in Canada, and other places in the world with white supremacy and caste systems and violations of human rights. And I just want to start off by saying that I'm sitting here in Arlington, Virginia, on Nacotchtank land. And I think I'm inspired by Rabbi Gottlieb's call for us and me to come from a reparationist and accountability standpoint to try to address issues here in the United States as well as around the world. With that, I want to make this a reality. This is the time when, yes, we've heard great, inspiring people, but, and many of us can leave here today and do our outreach, and that'd be great. But we can do more than just do individual work here and outreach. We've got this tremendous opportunity here to work together and try to put our heads together and actually use the opportunity to be more than the sum of our parts. Some of the amazing response to Jonathan's book in the last few weeks. I want to read you a letter we got yesterday from the former chief of mission and U.S. Consul General of Jerusalem, Philip Wilcox. He sent this yesterday. Thank you for the text of your terrific new book, which I read with deep interest and admiration. Your analysis and prescriptions are visionary and compelling and could not be more timely. This book deserves wide circulation and attention. Drawing on your long and distinguished career as a Palestinian lawyer and activist, your book sets a new standard, not just for authoritative and careful analysis of the Israel-Palestine tragedy, but for its persuasive, accessible, and practical outline of the political requirements that could lead to a mutually acceptable peace. By addressing dispassionately the essential moral, political, cultural, and security issues of highest concern to both peoples, i.e. the right of return and refugees, land, settlements, and sovereignty, your respect for the humanity of both peoples, your book is well designed to replace zero-sum fear and despair with realistic vision of hope. This is just, we got this yesterday. It's really inspiring people. We need to get this out. There's too much suffering going on. Some of the wonderful things that have just happened in the last 2 weeks. We had an organizing meeting of people wanting to promote this book. We had 35 people turn out. Many of them, some of you are here, many of them very influential and have devoted decades to this issue. Jonathan, in the last 2 weeks, has spoken at a fistful of venues already and interviews. The book is now available as an ebook on Kindle version and also in other formats. And I'll put those links up if you wish to spread the word about people who would like to use them in e-readers rather than the free PDF that we provide. A print version is in the works, but still weeks away. That's just where we're at. We're doing our best to get it out. It will come out, but we're still weeks away. Jonathan has translated a large portion of the booklet just in the last 2 weeks because it was asked, people like, where is the Arabic version and the Hebrew version? And he's already done a significant amount of translation for that already. We can't accomplish this goal without your help that Jonathan has set out. We need to change the conversation. So here's how you can help. Share the book widely. Organize speaking opportunities for Jonathan and potentially other people on this panel and other people who share this vision. Join a strategy group. We're trying to get people here on this call to join a group where we can do more than just do our individual outreach. How can we strategize together and really reach mainstream sectors and various sectors of our society to read this book and to wrestle with this conversation? Lynn Gottlieb has talked about starting up discussion groups or reaching out to discussion groups and book groups, which is amazing. And then help us raise the resources necessary to promote this campaign. If we're going to change the conversation, we need a tremendous amount of resources to make this happen. So please sign up on the Google form that we'll place in the chat window. Let us know what you think you want to do, which groups you want to try to join to help work together to really get this book widely known and talked about.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So Michael's going to put that essential doc in the chat, a Google Doc where you can quickly fill it out. You don't have to right now, but we'd love it if you can. help us know what you want to do. We're going to turn to Jonathan for his closing remarks, and then I have a final wrap up. This has been just a wonderful conversation. Jonathan.
Well, what I want to say really in conclusion is how grateful I am to all the people who have contributed to this effort, particularly at Nonviolence International. They went way beyond anything. I thought all you had to do is just write something up and post it, and that's it. It takes a lot of work, a lot of logistics to get even a booklet like that in printable form and to make it accessible and to make it available. And I want to thank particularly the staff and the interns and the Friends of Nonviolence International. A lot of people also participated in helping me put the ideas together. Bob Herbst, initially this was supposed to be a joint book, I think, and then we decided it makes more sense that a Palestinian present these ideas from my perspective. And there's a lot of people who are working on these issues. A lot of people in Israel, Palestine, who really care about these issues and who have been working and who have been suffering and paying a price for working for justice and for peace. And I'd like to say that I'm doing this also in the spirit of nonviolence. It is so easy to get so wrapped up in righteousness and thinking your cause is just, and then you pick up the gun and shoot the bad guy and shoot the other guy and bomb the other guy and destroy the other guy. And that only leads to more and more and more violence and hatred, and it sustains the injustices rather than removes them. So nonviolence is at its very roots a very positive force to resolving conflict, to moving forward, to uplifting life, liberty, equality, and justice as positive values for everybody. So I'd like for all of you to support Nonviolence International, to support this effort. I'm really pleased that this is not just an intellectual exercise of distributing the book, but also finding ways that we can co-resist together. Because again, as I mentioned at the beginning, peace has been co-opted. The word peace has become a dirty word almost. So we need to reclaim peace and nonviolence and activism as a positive thing that we can work for together. It's co-resistance, not normalization and acceptance of the status quo. This is, I think, my message. And again, I say, it's not about me. It's not even, about this. This book is an invitation for people to engage in a positive way for justice and for peace in a nonviolent way. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's really been a moving experience for me to be part of this and to know the different people who are joining us today. I will be trying to edit this as soon as Zoom gives us a recording. I will edit it and have it up. If you haven't yet been to our new YouTube channel, we got the URL, youtube.com/nonviolence. Please go there. All of our webinars are there. This one will be there shortly. And I hope all of you know some people who should see this webinar, even if they couldn't join us today. But there's also a new series Kelly Quinn has putting a spotlight on nonviolence, short, inspirational videos. Friends, you know we have a great deal of work to do, and we're going to need each other now more than ever. As I said at the start of this conversation, by joining this webinar, you are on the ground floor of something with great potential. I ask again, what are we going to build on this foundation? I hope many of you will be inspired to tell others about this work, to fill out the quick Google form that Michael has shared with you, and to help us change the conversation about Palestine and Israel, and by so doing have a real impact on policy and on people's lives. The future is calling on us to make the right choice. Arundhati Roy said, another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. Together, friends, we are breathing a new and beautiful future into reality. Shalom, salam, peace.
Thank you all for joining us. Have safe trips.
Now there's the custom of Hadith el-Bab, talking at the gate. Does that happen in webinars?
Love you all.
Goodbye, everybody.